I have a handful of Professor Vogel's books. I know that I'm probably missing about at least 20 or so. He was clearly a prolific author. Um, Rick, what do you know about Professor Vogel's writing habits? Specifically, did he tend to write in one particular place at a specific time of the day or night? Was he a quick writer?
Yeah, I actually I know a lot about his writing habits, and I inherited some of his notes, and we worked together on the last book. Uh, and also, it was the same when he advised me when I was writing my thesis. First of all, he did relatively little library research. It was mainly interviews. Even the Deng Xiaoping book, although there was a lot of historical material and he did library research, he did interviews. He interviewed members of Deng's family. He interviewed people in Japan, the United States, Europe, who had met Deng, trying to get his feeling about Deng. He did massive interviews. So what he would do in writing a book, and this changed over time with personal computers and so forth, but what he would do interviews. He would often not record the interviews while it's going on, but he would go away from an interview and record his notes. And in the old days, he would actually use a dictaphone or some kind of recording device. And then he would have his secretary transcribe his spoken notes. That would give him literally boxes and boxes of interviews. He would then juggle those and try to get the themes. He had this thing that he always told us, you've got to get the data, and then the data has to sing. It has to sing to you. So he would get the data, he would get the themes, and then he would do a draft. And the first draft he would do, maybe a teacher would give him a C+ on it for a term paper. Just get it on paper and get it there, and then start rewriting. And the drafts and the rewriting became easier with personal computers and be able to use word processors. But he would just get it on paper. And then Ezra just had relations all over in academia, outside of academia. He would get a draft to the point where he could send it out to people to read it. And he would send out, now you can do it by email, so he would send it out by email. And because Ezra was Ezra, people would send him back detailed comments. And he would take those and then he would do his rewrites and more rewrites and then send out again and do rewrites. It was a very intensive process. I don't think that he would look upon himself necessarily as a talented wordsmith, but he would work on it over time and really work on it until he got it right. And when I was doing drafts for my part of the last book, we get up to a point and he says, okay, now you've nailed it. And now go on to the next one. So he would really work. It was an amazing process.
So, in Professor Vogel's book, China and Japan Facing History, he describes the important chapters in China's and Japan's relations going back 1,500 years.
Right.
And if I remember correctly, he argued that peace in Asia and beyond, in large part, depended on both countries finding ways to both reconcile and work together on common challenges. How was this book received by leaders in Japan and China?
In Japan, first of all, Ezra's celebrity in Japan was enormous, rivaling Peter Drucker from Claremont. I went with him on the book tour in Japan in November 2019. And the draw is Ezra, author of Japan is Number One. You know, he could never divorce himself from that title, but it was very well received and has sold a lot of copies. And the Japanese translation is an excellent translation. The translator actually ended up correcting some of our mistakes. It was well received. And one other thing, that was also a book where he was on a mission. And he and I together visited Prime Minister Abe and also visited Suga, who is now Prime Minister, but then was Chief Cabinet Secretary. And trying to make comments about things like visits to Yasukuni Shrine and you know, and the ways that Japanese provoke the Chinese. And he did the same on the China side. Unfortunately, the Hong Kong translation into Chinese came out in 2019. The mainland translation has yet to come out, and I don't know when it will come out. But he was, you know, we also did field work for that. The 9th century missions that Japan sent to China, which were high risk, high reward. The ships would often sink and people would die. But we went down to Kyushu where those ships embarked, and we looked at the various archaeological sites of where the Japanese would gather their, prepare for the embarking to China. And one of the things we found on that site, in 830s, a Japanese monk named Saicho went to China, came back. When Saicho came back from China, he brought a flame from one of the temples that he kept burning all the way across the ocean. That flame is still burning in Kyushu. They have kept it burning, and you know, that's the importance that people risk their lives to go to China to bring back knowledge. The Buddhist sutras, literature, and so forth. And the period when there was hot war is the late 19th century and then the 20th century. But the period of hot war between Japan and China is actually fairly short. And then there's the 13th century invasion by the Mongols. But otherwise, it's been a very productive relationship. One other thing I should mention, I don't think we gave this enough emphasis in the book. After Tiananmen in the 1990s, in a way, China became sort of persona non grata among investors in the United States and so forth, but the Japanese were investing in China. The Japanese, through MITI and also JETRO, they had the Chinese write up lists of technology that they would like to study and import. And then the Japanese government went to Japanese companies to find the companies that had that technology and then asked them, would they share it with China? And then China would send over teams to study it. But Japan was that open in the 1990s to helping China. And I have a lot of friends in the ministry that were involved with that. I said, why did you do that? You're creating a competitor. And usually the answer was, it's guilt. They genuinely, people of that generation genuinely felt guilt. They wouldn't always say it,
right.
but it was one way of making recompense
Hmm.
for what Japan did against China from 37 to 45.
Hmm.